All right. So, I'm out here at the Broad River. I had to find me a new tree. I I got caught on my last one trying to do videos by my son's cub master, so I figured I'd find a new spot this morning since they're doing a whole bunch of work out there on the hunting place, the hunting spot that he maintains out there. So I came here today to talk about the greatest love story that I had the privilege to watch in my life. And to tell you this story, I'll have to tell you the reason, tell you about the person who made it possible. My grandmother's mother was an amazingly spiritual woman. She has probably had the greatest influence on the women in my life that made us the spiritual creatures that we all are. She was the big influence of us. And my grandmother, who was a Scorpio, when she was 14, she had a huge crush on my grandfather. And she tried to flirt with him and stuff like that. And he was like, you need to come back when you're older, you know. So I guess she had to be between 16 and 18. My grandmother had just broken up with her boyfriend, who was a drinker. And she broke up with him because her father was a drunk, and she realized that's not what she wanted in her life, and that's not what she was going to do. And, you know, first loves, heartbreaks. What does she do? She gets totally smashed. Totally smashed. She, my grandmother grew up in New York City. So she got totally smashed with her friends. She puked all over her clothes and threw them out in the subway and wore nothing but her jacket home, and had totally forgot that my grandmother had set up a date between her and my grandfather, or that she had had a date with my grandfather. I'm not sure if my grandmother set it up, but she had a date with my grandfather, and she was going to bail on it. She wasn't going to go because she was smashed and she had thrown up and everything. But my great-grandmother wasn't having it, and she was like, no, you're going on this date. You have to go on this date. You have to. This is something you have to do. You just, you know, this is going to be important for you. You have to do this. So she takes my grandmother and she throws her in the shower and she cleans her up and she makes her brush her teeth and she does her hair and she gets her all done up and she sobers her up as best as she can. And sure enough, my grandfather comes to pick her up and she sends her out the door. My grandparents are still married to this day. My grandfather is 82. I believe my grandmother is a couple years younger, so she's like 79. And they're still together to this day. And they're the ones that I lived with my mother after my father left. And they're the ones that I stayed with every summer. And the difference between evolved signs and unevolved signs is amazing. I mean, it's not that they never fought. They did fight. They fought about a lot of things. They fought about health things. My great-grandmother died of lung cancer from smoking. And when she got diagnosed and she ended up staying with my grandmother while she was dying. My great-grandmother died about 8 weeks before I was born. And it was really hard on my grandmother, and at that point, everybody smoked. Like, that was just, everybody smoked. So, my grandmother, when they realized that the smoking is what caused my great-grandmother, her mother's cancer, her and my grandfather stopped smoking. Just like that. Like that, just, it hit them that it's going to cause cancer and it's going to kill us and we're not smoking anymore. And they just stopped cold turkey right then, right in their tracks. Both of them together did it, and it wasn't, you know, they just did it. And then, you know, fast forward years later, the next big crisis they had was my grandfather's health. The man could eat. Oh, he could eat, especially pasta, and my grandmother's Italian, so there's always pasta. And I mean, the plates he would make, and he could eat so fast, it would blow our minds. And he would just shovel all this food in his mouth. So he hit a point where he had a heart attack, and he was getting unhealthy, and he was getting big. And my grandmother was like, you know, this is a problem. You're sick, and you've had a heart attack. You're going to have another heart attack if you don't stop. And so we're getting healthy, and it's either that or she didn't threaten to leave him, but she threatened to stop sleeping with him if he didn't get into some sort of shape other than the shape that he was in. And he did it. They did it together, and he did it. And my grandfather, now retired at 82, rides his bike like something ridiculous, like 20 miles a day. I'll say my grandfather is the greatest man I have ever known in my life. He is the pillar to which everybody gets held up against. It's driven everybody nuts that I've ever dated. But he was a Marine, and he jacked up his hand really bad in boot camp, so he left the Marines. And then when my grandparents were younger and they had young kids, he worked like 3 jobs to support them. Like, it wasn't a thing. They moved from the city out to Long Island. That's when he got a job as a photographer. And he worked for the New York Times. He used to do aerial shots from helicopters. And he worked for Newsday, where he was a photographer there. Editor, and he's like, I always make it a point, because I'm like the photographer of the family now, so I always make it a point to make sure I take plenty of pictures of my grandfather, because there's like none, because he was always behind the lens. But it's amazing, because she's a Scorpio and he's an Aquarius. And they had no problems when it came time to change or to evolve or to grow. They just accepted that that's what you were supposed to do. You're supposed to grow and change and evolve with people. And that's how they've managed to stay together for over 50 years. And that is the greatest love story. I mean, to this day, we were just at a cookout with them the other day, and I took a picture because when they weren't looking, because my grandfather, he was rubbing my grandmother's butt. She was just standing next to him while he was sitting in a chair. And he's just like, he can't even hear. My grandfather's always had hearing problems, which is why my family is so loud. Like, if you ever hung out with us, we're extremely loud, and it's because he's had hearing problems all our lives. He's always had hearing aids, and they've gotten worse. So he can barely hear, but he loves to still be with everybody and still be in the group. But he just had this huge grin on his face as he was cuddling my grandmother and rubbing her butt. And I was like, you know what? That is it. That is the greatest love story that I have gotten to bear witness to. And they were hugely impactful for me. My grandmother she is my biggest role model. And my grandfather is the greatest male influence in my life. For sure. And they are everything I strive for, man. I mean, they just, yeah, I don't even know how else to say it. They're just amazing people, because they never stopped evolving. You know, that's the difference between an unevolved sign and an evolved sign is as simple as that. It's not your evolution ends at any point. It's being able to continue to keep evolving and find someone who's willing to keep evolving with you too. Someone who's willing to set the same goals as you. And, you know, and even if you don't do it together, because my grandmother doesn't ride a bike. My grandmother has scoliosis and everything else. She can't work out like my grandfather does. So she's more on the food side of things. She keeps all the healthy food and stuff like that. And she buys him all his special breads that he likes and whatnot, so that he can be healthy but not feel deprived. So, yeah, I thought I needed to share that, because I know I shared a lot of unhappy childhood things on another video. So I thought it was important that the most influential people were my grandparents. And yeah, they're the ones that always had me outside too. My grandfather always had me, took us out on the boat on the Long Island Sound, overnight fishing on a boat in the Long Island Sound. Amazing as a kid. My grandmother, we used to go walk in the trails with the dogs all the time. We were always doing something out in nature together with them. You know, barbecues on the beach, yeah, walking trails, hiking, camping, all of that. All of that infected me too. And that's all the Yankee side of my family. So even the Yankees in my family that influenced me in my life were always very centered around being outside and being in nature with those that you love. And that's my important message that I'm putting out in this video. And that is the difference between an evolved sign and an unevolved sign. Evolved signs are not better than you. They're just willing to change, and unevolved signs are unwilling to change. Okay? I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.